Have you ever set goals for yourself and then realized way too late that the goals that you set were unachievable? Because I most definitely have. Hello everyone, my name is Ryan and welcome to my new channel, Unhinged Immersion, a channel all about language learning and completely immersing yourself into another culture. Today I wanted to start out this new channel by doing what all good language learners do at this time of year, and that is setting our language learning goals for the upcoming year of 2021. So I've been learning Japanese off and on for probably about the last 5-6 years now. And I really hadn't stuck with it up until this past year in 2020, starting in February, when I started to actually stay more consistent. I did take a little bit of a break for a while, but for the most part I stayed consistent with my studies. But as I said before, I had a habit of setting goals that were way too high, way too unachievable. That I was setting goals for myself that were putting way more pressure on me than I really needed. So when I was setting up the goals for this year, for 2021, I tried to keep them smaller, I tried to keep them more concise, and I focused more on setting daily goals, stuff to be accomplished each day, rather than setting these big massive goals of, where I want to be at the end of the year, how far I want to get, what level of fluency I want to get to, anything like that. I focus more on the small goals. So let me share with you what those goals are. So within the last couple of months, I saw a video on Immerse with Yoga's channel, now Immerse with Migaku, and the video was all about setting goals. It was all about setting achievable goals, and setting goals that were going to set you up for success rather than set you up for more stress and failure. It's essentially the basic point of what he was getting at. And so I really took that advice to heart when I went about making my goals for this. My goals for this year. And so when I sat down to do my goals, the first thing I decided was that I'm going to focus on using this, it's a newer program called Native Shark. And this program is one that I've been using for the past probably about 4 months-ish, something like that. It's like almost 4 months. I've been using it for about 115 days or something like that. So the first daily goal that I have is Native Shark, is to do the reviews for Native Shark and to do the lessons for Native Shark. So it really counts as the first two things, because Native Shark has a built-in SRS function that's set up so that you have to do those reviews every day before you can actually do the lessons. You cannot do the lessons until you've done those reviews. And I really like that it does that, because there are times that people will kind of neglect doing their reviews for a long time in favor of doing something like the lessons, something like the lessons in Native Shark or in Japanese from Zero, which is another series that I've done before, and doing their Duolingo and their Memrise and things like that. They'll kind of neglect doing the reviews in favor of doing the new lessons. And one of the things that I've found, and one of the things that any language learner can tell you, is reviews are very important. You aren't going to solidify that information in your head if you aren't reviewing it. And so that's one thing that I really enjoy about Native Shark. And so the first step for me each day is to sit down and do those reviews and do the Native Shark lessons. I have it set to do 2 lessons per day with Native Shark. You can have that changed so that it's like 1 lesson per day. And they have a couple of different options. And I'll do a review at some point so that and kind of a walkthrough so that you can kind of see that. But like I said, the first step is Native Shark. Now with Native Shark, I'm going to continue to do those 2 lessons per day along with the reviews until I get all the way through their phase 1 portion of their program. Because that's a newer program, so they only have phase 1 and then a few lessons of phase 2. So once I hit the end of phase 1, then I'll just focus on always making sure that those reviews are done. And then I'll focus somewhere else on some other content until they release more on that platform. The second part of my daily goals is immersion, and immersion comes in 2 parts, active immersion and passive immersion. So active immersion for me, and generally as Yoga with Immerse with Migaku has described it, is when you are actively sitting down and watching or listening to something in the native language that you are studying, in my case Japanese. And so for me that means sitting down and watching anime, or any dramas, any movies that are in Japanese, and watching them without the subtitles. Because when you have the subtitles on, you really aren't really learning anything, because you're too focused on reading the English in it, and rather than listening to the Japanese or the German or whatever it is that's spoken. And you can get a little ways with that, but it is way more effective as far as I've found, it's way more effective if I sit down and just listen and watch without any subtitles. It also helps if I'm watching something that I've watched before. So I'll do this with anime that I've seen a couple of times, and even 4 or 5 times, because there are a couple that I've seen that many times while doing this immersion. And the goal is for active immersion is to do 1 to 2 hours every day that I'm working. Any day that I'm not working, my goal is to do 2 to 3 hours or more, depending on kind of how I'm feeling that day. I'll try to do more. So 2 to 3 hours on my days off, which are Wednesday night and Thursday night, and 1 to 2 hours on the days that I'm working. So then for passive immersion, this is anything that you're listening to, like you can do this with, and which just makes me really happy, you can do this with Netflix. You can turn on an anime, and you actually have the function to turn off the screen or allow the screen to be locked while still playing. And so you can do that. You can listen to podcasts is one of the things that I do, or even just music in that native language, in your L2 as it were, or 3 or 4, or whatever you happen to be on. And the passive one is, you're going to be doing that while you're doing other things. I'm going to be listening to it while I'm doing the dishes or doing laundry, cleaning up the apartment, or while I'm working, because all I do is stock shelves. And so I'll listen to it while I'm working and things like that. And the goal for me is to get at least between 2 and 4 hours of passive immersion, of passive listening, the days that I'm working. On the days that I'm not working, I'm not as worried about doing passive immersion. I'll still probably do some, like while I'm cleaning and doing dishes and stuff like that. But a higher point of focus for me is going to be the active immersion at that point. And so that's what I'm going to focus more on. The next portion of my daily goal is actually something I mentioned earlier. I mentioned earlier that I had done the Japanese from Zero series here behind me. And so part of my daily goals is also going to be, and it's more focused on like my days off, is that I'm going to try to start going through the Japanese from Zero series again. And I'm going to start with book 3. I'd gone all the way through book 1 and 2 already. So I'm going to start with book 3. And like I said, on my days off, that's going to be one of the things that I add on to my native shark and my immersion, is I'm going to sit down and actually do some studying in those to kind of supplement, complement really, what I'm getting out of native shark and out of my immersion. It's a series that I've really liked. I like the way that it teaches. It had gotten to the point where it was getting a little boring for me, because there was no change for me, and I have ADHD. I need that kind of change and shift in order to stay focused. And so that's one of the things that I'm going to do, is I'm going to get back into Japanese from Zero and add that on to the other things that I'm already doing. The last thing that I have for my daily goals actually has a lot to do with one of my intentions for this channel, which is complete immersion. So what do I mean by that? So my idea for this channel is, not only am I going to be putting out videos about language learning, about my language learning, about like any of the tools that I find anything like that, but it's also a way for me to immerse myself more so, even more than just watching anime and shows from Japan or from Germany or whichever language I decide to study next. But one of the things that I'm going to do is that I'm going to actually sit down and research and look into different aspects of Japanese culture. In this case, I'm going to look into the history of Japan. I'm going to look into the history of the language. I'm going to look into their art, all forms of art. Their, like, the anime, the TV shows, and the movies, as well as the music and just straight art, painting, sculpting, all of that different type of thing, architecture. I'm going to sit down and actually do research on this and make a video on it. I'm going to talk about whatever that is, And this is, the intention for this is because when I first started learning Japanese, when I first started learning languages really, it wasn't because, oh, I want to be able to speak this language with people. I did want to do that, but it was more so that I was really fascinated by other cultures, and that was really my intention. I wanted to learn the language to be able to actually get into the culture more. That's what it was. And so I've really gotten away from that in the past, 6 years that I've been learning languages, and failing miserably. And so what I want to do, and it's something that I'm trying to do to help me keep focus, for one, is that I'm going to do all this research into the culture and put videos out for you guys so that hopefully you can start to get interested in the culture of Japan, or just interested in researching the culture of the language that you're studying yourself. Because, and it also partially has to do with my ADHD, is that if I do something like this, I'm hoping that it will kind of combat that, and that I won't have as much of a tendency to essentially want to quit or want to stop for a couple of days or something like that, because that's something that really hurts me, is stopping for a day or two, or stopping for a week, or I took a break for a month at one point this last year. But I really don't want to do that. Like, a day or two I'm okay with, really, but I don't want to end up having a week where I don't study at all, or a verse at all, or anything like that. And so I'm hoping that in doing this research, I'll be able to stay more focused, and it will keep my passion up for the culture and for learning the language. And I'm also hoping that in doing this, that I will also inspire passion in other people as well. I want to make other people passionate about learning languages, about learning cultures, and things like that. And so that is one thing that I'm going to do with this channel. That is it for my daily goals. So now let's get into the 2 or 3 yearly goals that I planned out. So my yearly goals I kept pretty simple, because those are the ones that have a tendency to run away from me. Those are the ones that I tend to go, oh, I want to be able to speak, to this much of a level by this point, or things like that. And what I found was that was really, really hurting me, and it was making it so that I wasn't ever getting very far. So instead, I decided to keep them very simple. First and foremost is that I want to have finished all of the available native shark lessons, and that shouldn't be too terribly difficult, because that will probably only encompass the first couple of months of the year. Because of the number of lessons that are available right now, it'll probably only take me through about February, maybe not even that long, to finish those. As well as I want to actually have finished going through the Japanese from Zero series, because I have book 3, and then I'm going to get book 4 and 5. I'm going to go through those as well. And my goal is to get through both, or books 3, 4, and 5 by the end of the year. And then once I finish those, if I still have time left but at the end of the year, I'm going to actually go back through them a little bit and do a little bit of a review, make sure that everything's stuck, essentially. The next goal I have by the end of the year is I want to be able to read in Japanese a lot better than I can now. I can read a little bit, simply because of how Native Shark teaches, which I'll go into when I do a video on that. But I want to be able to sit down and read like a manga or something like that with less difficulty. I'm not necessarily saying that I want to be able to just sit down and read it just like I would a book in English. I want to be able to sit down and not have to spend 30 minutes on a page trying to figure out everything that's going on. I want to be able to sit down and look at one page and be able to read it perfectly, and then the next page read it and find a couple of words that I didn't know and have to look those up. That's kind of my goal. And I'm hoping to be able to get some manga in Japanese with the hiragana, the katakana, the kanji, all of that. And as well as I'm going to be using the Satori Reader, which has been really good, because it has the audio component to it where it just reads to you. And so I'm hoping to be able to use those to be able to read more. My third goal is that I want to, by the end of the year, I want to start into speaking practice. And it's not that I don't speak at all. I say a few phrases, but it's mostly, I don't have anybody to practice with, because nobody in my life is learning Japanese as well. I have one other friend who's learning a different language. I think they're learning German or maybe Spanish. It's one of the two. And so there's really nobody that I can practice with. And so I'm hoping that by the end of the year, I can actually sit down and do actual speaking practice with a native speaker or with a tutor or something like that. Because me just telling, like, one of my coworkers has gotten interested in possibly starting to learn Japanese, and he's always asking me about it. And so I've taught him a couple of phrases, but that really doesn't count as speaking. Like, he doesn't know what I'm saying. I could be telling him something completely different. And so I want to be able to sit down with a native speaker or with a tutor, somebody who I can actually get some practice in with. And I'm hoping to be able to do that by the end of the year. And as part of that, towards the end of the year in October, Anna and I are going to be going to Walt Disney World in Florida for about 10 days. And one of my favorite things about Walt Disney World is the Epcot park. I love going to the Japan Pavilion in Epcot, and I love going there and talking to the native Japanese people, because the people that are working in the Japan Pavilion, assuming that everything has gotten more towards normal with the pandemic and everything, and the Japanese people are allowed to come back, is that all of the people that are working in the Japan Pavilion are from Japan. They're all from Tokyo. I've met a couple of them from Tokyo. I met one from Kyoto. I met one from, one of them was from Osaka, and one of them was from some small town that's like kind of in between Tokyo and, I can't remember the other town that she told me. And so I want to be able to, that's going to be later in the year, so that's one of my goals with the speaking practice, is I want to be able to try to have a little bit of a conversation with one of those native speakers while we're in Epcot. And so that's one of my goals as well, to kind of go along with the speaking. So, and I'm really, really looking forward to that. The last goal that I have, as far as the yearly goals go, is that I want to teach my son Aiden a few more phrases in Japanese. I've taught him a couple of words, and he understands the phrase. He understands me asking him, "Where's the moon?" which is "Tsuki wa doko desu ka?" He recognizes me asking that, and he knows what I'm saying. So he knows the word "tsuki" for moon. He knows "bolshi" for hat. And then he knows the word "koen" for park. He doesn't recognize that one as well, because that one's a newer one that I taught him. And so I want to teach him more. And I also want to be able to do a little bit more speaking with our new son when he's born, which should be in the next couple of months. And I want to be able to use a few more phrases on him, and to kind of have him with that immersion right off the bat, and kind of work up from there. Now, through all of this, my biggest plan is that I'm really going to try to not let myself get down. I'm going to try to stay positive about everything. I'm going to try not to let my ADHD get the better of me, because that tends to happen. But I'm really one of my biggest goals is that I want to be kind of hyper focused on doing this. I want to be hyper focused on learning Japanese. But at the same time, I'm not going to sacrifice time with my sons when the next one's born. I'm not going to sacrifice time with my sons in order to learn Japanese. Like, my sons and my wife are the most important part of my life for me. The learning Japanese is secondary to them. It is a very close secondary in importance to me, but they are more important. And so if it comes down to, I can either study Japanese or I can spend time with my sons and my wife, because I haven't spent time with them, in a couple of days or something like that, because we've been working and doing this and that, then I'm going to choose spending time with my family, because that to me is what's important. And that's also part of Japanese culture. Family is very important. And so I'm not going to sacrifice that. So those are my goals for language learning in 2021. Like I said, I'm highly focused on my daily goals, and then I just have those few yearly goals. So I'm really hoping that by the end of this year, I can make a lot more progress in my Japanese. So I hope that you all will join me on this journey that I'm continuing on. And I hope that in watching my videos, it will also encourage you on your own journey. So with that being said, now let's get out there and immerse.